You
I win?
win.
What do
Yeah.
I win?
I'm interviewing an event planner, and we said that we would do this interview at noon. And I was like, when is she gonna jump on? My guess was 11:55, but you made it right before noon, and I was like, it's exactly what I would have expected. So you already won.
11:55 would have probably painted me in a better light as an event planner.
Well, I was like, well, I guess it depends on how busy you are, but for me, it's like, oh, if I was there like 15 minutes early, that's like the best. But that's too early.
It's too eager. You got to be cool.
Yeah,
You got to be
yeah.
cool.
You got to be chill, but like on time.
Yeah.
So, congratulations. I'm gonna put the time. Let me see, 11:59, right on time. Let's talk event
Right on time.
management.
Yeah. If you're early, you're late. So
Yeah, is that the mentality?
no, I mean I think how does that phrase go? It goes if you're early, you're
you're
on time. If you're on time, you're late, and if you're late, you're fired.
Oh, fired! I thought it was
That's what
something like
it
you're on time
probably
if you're
is.
like 5 minutes early or something.
It probably is something less harsh, but that's just the mentality that I was raised with and that
Yeah,
I grew
yeah.
up with. So for us, it's, super stressful to be late.
Vita, thanks for jumping on. We're really good friends with you and Benny, and you guys are a power couple. So I just wanted to highlight both of you guys on this craft talk thing, and I'm really glad that you jumped on.
Thanks for having me.
So how do we want to start? I guess, yeah, let's just start with that whole being on time mentality. You said you were raised on that kind
It
of
was.
mentality.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me
My,
about your traumas. Let's go.
oh, therapy session. I forgot. This is like
Yeah.
one big therapy session. I love that. So I think my mom and my dad are both immigrants. They immigrated from Guatemala. And so I think a big part of them, they didn't come here to play, right? They came here to work.
Yeah.
And part of that is you had to prove yourself and prove that you were worthy of the job that you were given, right? The privilege that you had to be in the
Yeah.
United States and have a job here. And so my dad just really instilled a strong work ethic, and by what he showed us and what he modeled for us, but then also the things that he would say, right? And so he was always very much an on-time person. We didn't get a warning that he was going out to the car to wait for us. Like we just needed to know that it was time to go. And so he wouldn't say anything. We would leave the house a little bit later and he would already be like fuming in the car because he's like, that it's time to go. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to warn you about this, So that was just kind of his approach. That was his philosophy on things. And I think that's what made me pretty strict on timelines. And so he always instilled in us too, like, you work every day with the same passion and the same effort that you worked your first day on the job. And so you have to carry that through your entire career, right? And so you don't let up. You don't let up. You don't lax. You continue in that pursuit of excellence that you were pursuing your first day.
Wow.
And so, yeah.
You just jogged something in my memory with my dad and going to church. Like we would literally show up to church, like we grew up Catholic, so like Catholic mass.
Okay. Yeah.
We'd be there like 30 to 45 minutes early.
Oh my gosh.
And it wasn't even to get to like the front pew
Yeah.
or whatever. We would literally, our normal spot was the very back. I don't know why, but like 45 minutes or 30 minutes early, and it'd be kind of the similar thing. Like the car has already started.
Yeah.
It's just like, you better be ready.
Yeah. I shouldn't
funny.
have to tell you.
Yeah.
It's time to go to the car. Yeah.
And did you find that like, was that like a drag back then, or were you just kind of used to it?
No, it was stressful because my dad's a very serious man. Like he's pretty
Yeah.
stoic when you meet
Okay.
him. And so it was pretty stressful because then we were leaving the house like, oh my gosh, we're already in trouble. Like
Yeah.
it's a bad start to the day. And so, yeah, it was stressful. I
So
would say.
does that inform a lot of how you walk through like school and high school as far as like discipline and being organized and all that?
So it informs, I think, how I think about being late, which I've
Okay.
never thought about actually until this conversation.
Oh, okay.
So it was stressful, right? Because we would get in the car, he was already angry at us. And so that would already like have me on edge, have me nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think, and I think I've relaxed over the last few years because, Benny's a lot more chill.
Yeah.
And so, but I think there's this like stress that's triggered in me when I'm running late because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm late. Like this is so disrespectful to people's time,
Mm.
and so I do get that anxiety that I used to get when my dad would be waiting for us in the car. I wish I could say that it informed my high school career, my middle school career. I would say it probably had the opposite effect.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah, I was a pretty challenging teen. Um,
Okay.
I was a pretty bad student in high school. Like I graduated by the skin of my teeth.
But you were on
So
time to graduate, though.
I was on time to the graduation. I
Yeah.
skipped a good amount of my first periods because they gave me a car and it was all downhill from there. I was like, oh, I'll just get there when I wake up. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So did you need the structure to be on time? Like, did you need that pressure, or were you
I think I
self-motivated
did.
by? Okay, I see.
No, I think I did when it came to school specifically. When it came to my job, like, I worked at Target when I was in high school, worked at a couple of different stores. And for my jobs, I was there very much on time. Didn't mess around. But for high school, yeah, I didn't really care. I was a pretty bad student, and so didn't prioritize being on time.
I
Yeah.
can't see
I
it.
prioritized my sleep.
Okay, that's good. That's good. I
Yeah.
can't see that for some reason. Knowing who you are, it's just so hard to imagine. But yeah, there's probably so many stories of just like,
Yeah,
yeah, we were different back then.
definitely.
So as far as okay, so you're a CMP, certified meeting planner, right?
Yeah, certified meeting professional.
Certified meaning professional. Sorry, I apologize if I got that wrong. CMP. I always just see the letter right after, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So you earn those letters as a certified meeting professional. How did that come about? So I want to know a little bit about the origin story, if you will.
Okay.
Like now knowing that you had this kind of backstory of being on time, where did it all click for you?
I think so in high school, because I was such a terrible student, I think my parents had pretty low expectations of me. And it became for me a challenge. And so, like, I don't think they were very confident, rightfully so. They weren't very confident that I would even finish college. And so I took that on as a challenge. I was like, watch me finish. It's going to take me forever, but watch me finish college. And so it took me 8 years to get my undergrad because I was working full time and going to school part time. And there were a few classes I think in the beginning I had to take multiple times. I just had a really hard time in school. I just didn't like it.
Yeah.
And so, but I think once I got through my general courses, once I went into the actual hospitality industry, I was really enjoying it. And so I think that's what changed was I was interested in what I was learning. I didn't start out as an event management major. I started out as a public relations major. And I sat through a lot of the speech classes. I sat through a lot of those initial classes that you take for PR. And it kind of felt like I was going to have to spin things a lot. And I didn't want to do
Oh,
that. I
okay.
was like, I want to do the more fun side of public relations, like the release parties, or stuff like that. And so I switched to event management and I just really enjoyed it. I loved just how different each event could be. I loved the organization of it. It was up my alley. I was finding embracing this new part of myself or that was more administrative, that was more organizational. And so, yeah, so it just clicked for me, I think then. And so once I finished my undergrad and I got into the actual field, in school, they tell you, a CMP certification is very highly regarded in the industry. It opened doors for you. Oftentimes it was seen as something that you could do in lieu of a master's degree. Like, a lot, I think even at the time, there weren't a lot of master's programs for event management. Now there are.
Okay.
and you can go pursue a master's. But at the time, there wasn't an option really for that. And so that was like the next best thing. You know, if you can't pursue a master's, or there isn't really a master's in event management, but there is the CMP certification, and it will essentially gain you credibility in the industry. It will show people in the industry that you know the industry standards, that you have, you know, made an effort in this career. So that's how it came about.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because when you think about events and meetings and parties and all that, sometimes it would be, unless you are a part of the industry or aware of the industry, it's hard to even recognize that there's industry standards within that space. And, you know, unfortunately, probably there's a lot of companies who don't have dedicated meeting planners or event professionals.
Yeah.
And it's usually some poor marketing person who gets
Or
bestowed,
admin.
or admin, to go
Yeah.
plan this event.
Yeah.
And most people don't realize how much there is to think about. You and I mean, I was a part of the hospitality industry for about a decade. As you know, I worked on the other side of things, where I was in the hotel space or the convention space doing the audio visual. So I was part of the catering team. Like, we were all working together to make the event happen for the client or the customer, which would have been you. And the number of event planners who come through who might not have those letters next to their name,
Yeah.
and they're coming in as the client and have no idea what they're getting themselves into. As a CMP, what kind of things does that certification, or just like that knowledge base, what are like the huge pillars of things that like most people don't think about?
So I think a big part of the CMP process when you get your certification is you have to have a certain amount of working experience. You have to have a certain amount of education credits that you have to go through. So you're forced to know the industry terminology, the jargon. And so I think that's one of the big things, is speaking the same language that the hotel is speaking across the industry, right? That's really important to know, because it does let them know that you understand what you're asking for. You understand the gravity, if you will, or the seriousness of what you're asking them to do. I think the other part of that is it's a standard for a reason, right? The standards have been established because we've seen how it can affect an event positively or negatively. And so that comes with experience. And so when you are a certified meeting professional, you're really drawing on that experience of thousands and thousands of event planners who have set this as the standard. And so I think it really eliminates a lot of the trial and error. I think when you're coming in and you're not an event professional, you can do it for sure. It's possible, and you can do an excellent job, but you're not going to know what you don't know. And I think that's a big part of what we learn about when you are an event professional and you are aware of the industry standards. You're keeping up with your education, because you are required to keep up with your education too.
Okay.
So it wasn't like a one and done thing. I have to do education credits every year to make sure that as the industry is changing, as the standards are changing, I'm staying up to date on those and understand what I'm asking for.
So just like with all kind of certifications, it's almost like this repository of knowledge and experience that you as a future generation can learn and hopefully not have to make those same mistakes, right?
Right.
Is there anything like when you do a recertification, are all of these kind of rules and guidelines already pretty well set forth? Or are there any like new things that like you just found out this year, like, oh, setting up chevron, like the chairs or something, actually is not efficient for this style of blah, blah, blah. Are there things like that is changing, that's like quick and modern and new?
There are definitely new things every time. So for example, when I was going through my certification, it was in 2018. I was I was pregnant and I did the exam like a month before having my first daughter, my daughter Mila. And so it was interesting because it was 18. I did the certification, and then in 2020 everything changed.
Oh yeah.
And so that, and I remember even sitting in that class, the spring of 2018, and them defining what a pandemic was. And I was like, well, when would that ever even happen? Like, that's that applicable?
Wow.
And sure enough, a year and a half later, or 2 years later, we are in the middle of one. And so I think the pandemic really changed a lot. After 2020, for sure, there were new guidelines that we had to study, new ways that we had to figure out how to do things. My company specifically ran the first event at the Ritz-Carlton Orlando post-pandemic. And so we had to work with them really closely to figure out what that was going to look like, right?
Yeah.
Whether it was like face masks are required, there are face shields, all of these things. That was a new development. And that was more of a circumstantial development, right? That was a new thing because we were going through a pandemic. Other things might be like changes in laws. You have to understand how to read through your contracts and what is acceptable and what isn't. What are the clauses that you can push back on? And sometimes that can change if laws have changed. So you have to keep up with that.
As far as like cancellation, like type of
right. Like, so for
language?
example, the pandemic changed some of the cancellation clauses. Some of the cancellation clauses weren't honored during the pandemic because of the wording. It didn't include pandemic in there. And so now we have to kind of re-educate ourselves of how do we word these clauses that protect our organization in the event of another pandemic, or, the craziest thing happens. We had to add verbiage in there for all of those unknowns. The clauses before were things that were pretty standard, right? They were acts of God, weather things, force majeure type of things.
Yeah.
Well, what about when there isn't really an act of nature, but people can't travel? Then what? And so those clauses changed, the approach changed. And those were the things that we were talking about in a lot of the education courses was how do we adapt to this new normal? How do we protect ourselves in the future if something like this were to happen again? The other part of that has changed a lot is technology. Technology changes all the time. And so now the conversation is, well, how is AI affecting how we plan our events? How do we leverage AI? What do we need to watch out for with AI? And how do we approach that in the event space?
Yeah.
So it's different things like that I think come up as new things come up. As new things develop, we have to educate ourselves on how to approach that moving forward.
Okay, so AI is a big topic of conversation with events at the moment.
It is.
I assume it's just getting figured out right now. It's just kind of having the conversation back and forth.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of people are hesitant to embrace AI, and so our conversations happening of like, what could this look like for you? What are the good things about AI, and how do you leverage it for your event? What is it capable of? Right. And so I think having the conversations, even starting there, because a lot of the events people, they are not technology people, so we don't know the full capacity of AI at this point, right? And or even how to best leverage it,
right,
for our events.
What are the applications are you hearing about? Because I haven't even thought about. Obviously, there's like, virtual assistant AIs that you could possibly, put out there for your event. So like if somebody's looking for a room, it's much more. It feels more personal rather than like scrolling through the event brochure or whatever.
Yeah.
Are there any applications that you specifically are looking at or hearing about and are going, oh, that's kind of interesting?
I think it's more in the audiovisual world and how to automate some of those things. Also in, like you were saying, some of the conversations, right? So we have an application that we use for our events. And so how is AI going to affect that? Is there going to be a component where there's a live, conversation that could be happening with an AI bot? And so those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. We've not really dived too much into it in our organization. We've not embraced it too much at this point. So it's really just the educational courses that we're taking are really more about understanding what the possibilities even are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So you're truly battle tested in that you were an event professional for however many years, and then 2020 happened, and this is just a huge shift. And yeah, it's like, it's wild when you think about, obviously when in contracts, it's really interesting because currently my day job is in contracts, and we work with that force majeure language a lot. And it was really sad to hear, like in 2020, I remember all of those weddings getting canceled, and the wedding party would just have such a beast of a time trying to get a refund back because they had this kind of like ambiguous language in their contract that they lose their deposit, and what was happening at the time didn't really qualify. But it's like, how did you, like, we had no idea that was going to happen. Obviously, it was really, I could sympathize with the businesses because they were also just scratching to like get whatever they can keep to keep their payroll or whatever. But also at the same time, it's like, was that right? Right versus what's on the contract is like, it's kind of tough to manage those. And some people chose a certain way, and it's tricky.
It is. It's really tricky. And I think that there are negative impacts on both sides, right? There aren't any winners really, especially in those moments where you're right. The business is trying to keep as much of their cash flow as they can because they want to keep their employees. And then you have the client side, and they've spent a lot of money on this event that now is not going to happen. Yeah. So that's tricky.
It's tough. Yeah. And the one thing about AI, at least, who knows in the future how close to humans they get. But, to me, like when I look at event management or event planning, there's such a human aspect to it. So like one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is setting and managing expectations, whether it's from your own team or the venue's team. It's nice if you can get everything that gets visualized to make happen. But I feel like a lot of times there's a lot of compromise involved. So how would I ask this? So if you had like, say the higher up has this idea of like an event, and they throw out all of these ideas. I want confetti going this way, and then I want an airplane to come through and do all these things. You as the event specialist and the event professional, how do you decipher what's needed and how to reel somebody back in without making them but also like being able to achieve their vision, I guess?
I think a big part of that conversation is about them feeling heard, right? You want an airplane. Tell me why you want an airplane, right? Like, what do you want to accomplish there? Not in a shutting them down immediately way. If somebody comes to me, let's use this airplane idea, right? Yeah. If someone comes to me and says, I want to run an airplane through our ballroom, like I want it to fly into the ballroom. Yeah. Right. I think inwardly my first reaction is like, absolutely not. That's not happening.
But we're taking flight. We're taking flight, Vita.
Yeah, we're going to not do that. Yeah. I think outwardly though, I would listen. I would try to understand their vision, their goal. What are they really trying to accomplish with this airplane? Is it a wow factor? Is it really like they're wanting to be on theme? And so listening to that, giving them some preliminary, this is what would be a challenge with this, right? A couple of challenges here. That ballroom's not big enough for an airplane, or we don't have event. Like this is a pretty like out there idea, right? But like, okay, so challenge number one, things we need to think through. We need to think through the fact that this ballroom's not big enough for that airplane. It's not big enough for it to safely fly in there, safely land. Another thing would be there are a lot of regulations that would keep us from doing this. And so not coming to kill their idea, but trying to understand more about what they're wanting to accomplish, and then raising some preliminary flags of why it may not work. But then also being willing to say, I will look into it and I will actually make an effort and do my due diligence. Maybe it is possible, right? Because what I've found is oftentimes in my mind, I might go straight to the why it can't happen. And then when I actually go down the rabbit hole of it and do the research, oh, maybe we could make this happen. And so I think like as crazy or out there as an idea might be, don't shut it down right away. Shut it down after you've done your due diligence, after you have done the research about whether it could actually happen. If it can't happen, then you come back and you say, okay, we can't do the airplane in the ballroom. Here's what we can do. Here's how we can accomplish what you're wanting to accomplish, right? Maybe it's not a real airplane. It's an airplane that's flying through the LED screens, right? Or maybe it's a model airplane that we've staged in the ballroom. Maybe it's a larger than usual airplane, right? Things like that. What are the options that would still give the people with the vision some things to think through, some realities that they need to work around, but then also not kill their dream or their vision for the event, and work with them on that, right?
Yeah.
And so the other key part of that is that when a visionary person has all of these ideas, and they're great, like we wouldn't have events without these, right? We need them just as much as they need us.
It is such an art, and to not kill someone's idea.
Yeah.
I think it's so easy. I would imagine it's so easy because to respond in a reactive manner, because you are certified in this. You, like I said, that repository of experience of failures, you already see 50 steps down the line. Like to you, it's an easy no, but it's says a lot about your skill in that you didn't respond right away with a no. You kind of digest it a little bit first, and you're asking why rather than that's impossible. And and I think I hear it all the time. It's like asking why first, right? It's such a crucial step into figuring out how to meet a goal. Because sometimes when you have this like visionary or creative idea, it's hard to explain into words what you want, and how it can look in like the physical is like, maybe this visionary person just has a hard time explaining what they really want. So they go to the extreme of just like, I want a plane to go through this whole ballroom. When you offer realistic and measured like responses, it empowers them to make the choice, and empowers them to realize that what's not possible. It's kind of like that whole like, there's no such thing as a no. Like you're not really saying no. You're just giving options for them to have the ability to say no. I guess on the flip side of that, in what moments do you have to put your foot down?
I think when I think through what I would put my foot down. So I think one of the things I was thinking about, going back to the visionary and thinking through, like as a visionary, it really helps when you bring the administrative people into the people that are going to be executing what you're asking into the process sooner, right? Yeah. Don't come up with this and then like start printing on it on the programs or whatever, and then decide that you're going to do it and you haven't talked to the people that are executing it, for one, right? The other part of that is, as the person executing it, we have to come in with a posture that isn't on the defensive already, right? These people who have this great idea, they're not out to make my job difficult. They really just want to make it a great event. And so I think if I can remind myself of that, of you really just want to make this the best event ever. It's not really about making my job difficult or putting my team in a difficult position. Then I think my posture towards them can change as well, because then it's, how do we work on this together? And so, no, we can't make that happen. Here's what we can do, and focus on what we can do. And be willing to do that research and say, I'm going to go back and see if there is a way. Maybe there is a way to do it. And again, that's kind of taking that humble posture to say, I could be proven wrong. My initial thought may be, this is impossible, but I'm open to being proven wrong. Now, the things that I would say no to would be things that would cost the rest of my team a phenomenal amount of effort. Things that would put them in a position where they would lose a ton of rest. It would impact their mental health. It would really add stress to what they're already doing, right? Because we're asking a lot of them. They're coming in for that week, working 100 hours for that week.
Yeah.
I'm not
All
going
day, all
to, if
night.
it's
Yeah.
all day, all night, right? We're first in, last out. And so
Yeah.
anything that's going to add stress to that, add one more thing for them to do, I might push back on, and again, it just kind of depends on what it is.
Right.
So those are the things that I would say no to.
Right.
That's my first filter is how is this going to affect my team?
Mm-hmm.
And then the next thing would be, how is this adding to the program? If it's not adding to the program, it's just adding work to my team, we don't need to do it.
So the juice worth the squeeze. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And say you have planned it out, and in your head, this is a realistic, balanced approach to how to handle this event. And you get to the venue, and you're getting resistance from, say, the hotel staff or the convention staff, whether it's like turnaround times where you want to flip a room in this number of minutes or something like that. That happens all the time. There is the component of the customer first, right? Like you're going to have a lot of weight into those decisions, but you being a really mindful person are probably going, how does this affect the hotel staff, the convention staff?
Right. Yeah.
Where's your balance there? How do you work that out with your vendors and your, venues?
I think I do see the hotel staff as an extension of my team. So
Also,
if I'm not going to, right. So I'm thinking overall team. Like I think if it's an unrealistic expectation of my team, that would include the hotel team as well. I think a big part of that is I don't commit to doing something until I've checked all of those things, right? So if the visionary person comes and says, I have this great idea, this is what I want to do, I won't say, yes, let's go with it, let's do it, unless I'm pretty confident that we can. But if it's something that might be more of a tight room flip or something like that, I would say, let me see how we can make this happen. Then I'll go back to the hotel and check, or have someone on my team go back to the hotel and check if that's possible. I think that would happen more if it's like a late in the game change, because we turn in our banquet event orders a month out. So typically by that point, we pretty much know every room flip that's going to happen, the timing of everything. We have that already in place. The hotel knows they've had a chance to maybe push back if they need to. And so by that point, if it's before that, then it's it's easier, because then we can submit that with our banquet event orders. We can make it happen. But if it's later in the game, I'm not going to commit to that until I've checked that I can actually make that happen.
Yeah.
And so that's also setting some expectations and saying, let me see what I can do. Sets the expectation of there's a chance that we can't make this happen, or that it's going to look different than what you're asking me to do.
Yeah. And it's better to be upfront about that rather than kind of doing this like, yeah, okay, and then it not happening and then trying to explain later. We're like, well, I have to check, it's more of like, hey, I'm going to see if this is possible. It might not happen, but I'm going to do everything I can to like see.
Exactly.
Oh man, I wish we had more of you when I was working in that space. I guess let's continue talking about traumas here. For myself, I just remember, not going to name any names, I don't even remember them, but like, I'm sure I've shared with this before, where, the banquet event order, right, is like the source of truth for what happens in the space, how the room is going to be laid out. And we had a client where one didn't get it in on time, right? So it's all like we're running on the fly. And we were setting up this general session. And for people who don't know what that is, that's just like the big ballroom with massive screens where everybody in the event kind of gathers as like a main base, a home base, before they break out into different rooms to do like little sessions here and there. And we had this room oriented a certain way, and it was like, they had the entire day to walk through the room, and the client didn't walk the room until like 11 at night. And I get a call from my technicians going, the client wants it flipped the other way. You also are aware, like, these types of events have been being planned for months, even years ahead of time,
Yeah.
Like we had diagrams of how it was going to look, and it was something like the version tracking was different. So it just like something didn't work out. People we're humans. People either miscommunicate, and sometimes the vision doesn't, you don't know until you see it. How would you approach a scenario like that where you had a specific vision of the orientation of the room per se? The staff somehow executed, whether it was their fault or not, executed differently, and it'd be a whole mess to try to flip it. Do you let it fly, or what's the compromise there, I guess?
Yeah, I think it depends on the scenario. I think for one, I know, and everyone on my team knows what orientation I want, what the experiences that I want walking into the ballroom. So that should have been discussed months ahead of time. Literally anyone on my team could tell you. I
So
want to walk into.
you have a
I
specific,
have a specific feel for the event. Now, granted, I've been doing this for 9 years, right? So
yeah,
I have a lot of thoughts on it.
yeah,
But I think like when I walk into the ballroom, I don't want to walk in on the side of the ballroom. I want to walk in and the screens are in front of me. That's the experience that I want for my attendees.
okay,
So everyone on my team would know that. Everyone on my team who saw a diagram that conflicted with that would raise that flag and confirm. Now, if the whole so all that to say, that would be really hard for me because I think if we had already agreed on a diagram with the hotel and the hotel on their side set it up wrong, I'm going to push back a little bit more as an event
sure,
planner.
yeah,
I'm going to say, this is not what we had agreed on. This
of
is something
course,
that you guys messed up on. You guys have to fix this. And so, to some degree, like what's realistic, right? And
yeah,
so if they're like, well, it would take us 14 hours to flip this. We only have 10 until showtime. Well, then I have to reprioritize. Is my priority to start on time,
yeah.
or is my priority to flip this room?
You
I'm
getting that
probably going to
you're
flip the
getting that
room.
refund.
Oh, but for sure, I'm going to get a credit on the other end, right?
Yeah,
Because that wasn't the experience I wanted, and it
yeah,
wasn't what we had agreed to. And so I think, I will still be respectful to the hotel and say, like, all right, what can we do? And if all said and done, it's not possible. All right, we're just going to work with what we have. We're going to keep it moving because my higher value is starting on time. It
yeah,
will. Nobody else in the guest list is going to know that it was supposed to be the other way.
right,
And so I also have to think through that. Right? Is it worth it? The only people that will know are the people on my team because we know how it was supposed to look.
yeah,
Right? So let's roll with the punches. Less than ideal, but we'll roll with the punches on that. But then, yeah, on the other end of that event, when we're negotiating, conversations will be had for sure with
yeah,
management
sure,
about that impact and that negative impact that it had on our event.
yeah. It all comes back to how do we get this done on time, right?
Right.
Like everything
Yeah.
in between
Sometimes.
everything can happen, but like, will it be on
Yeah.
time?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that makes total sense. Even subliminally, like you said, the atmosphere that you've created in your event, the way somebody walks into a ballroom, whether they know it or not, like if they can mentally process it or not, like walking in sideways versus into the screens or whatever plays an effect somewhere down the line. You might not be able to explain it, but it does. Would you think the same way, like if your ballroom dimensions is kind of like long, and so if you want the screens to be like in front of you when you walk into the ballroom, but the depth is so deep that the sight lines of like the the guests sitting all the way in the back of the room can't see the screen. I mean, at that point, are you adding delay screens? Like,
No, I mean, I think overall the guest experience is going to prevail, right?
okay,
The guest experience during the long program will prevail over the guest experience just walking into the ballroom. What we found though, typically, is that ballrooms have entrances all around them. They have entrance in that front, what I would consider the front of the ballroom, and there's side entrances as well. And so for us, for example, if it's a rectangle, I'm gonna use my phone.
yeah,
Right. So if it's a rectangle, people are walking in this way.
yep,
The screens are up here.
yep,
Right. That's the goal. That's the ideal. If for whatever reason they can't walk in this way and we have to put the screens here, well, then these people back here are just going to have a bad view, right?
Yeah.
They're going to feel really far. They're going to feel more removed. They're going to feel more that separation between their table all the way in the back of the room and the speaker all the way in the front. So I want to bring them as close to this stage as possible.
Yeah.
And I'm going to accomplish that by spreading out these tables in a way that makes it feel that way.
So you like the wide orientation because it brings
Yeah.
you a little closer.
You're only 4 rows of tables back in
Yeah.
the last row of tables versus being 12 rows of tables back. That's
Yeah.
a different experience.
Yeah, totally. And I imagine that when you look at venues, that's something specifically you're looking at, because sometimes we've had situations where we had multiple groups in the same convention center, and it'd be like one group is in one main ballroom and then the other is in the other, like right next to each other. And like if they had enough headcount, if one group had enough headcount, they could open up the whole thing and fill it, but they didn't have enough of that headcount. So they did with a smaller ballroom, but in that long orientation or something like that. I forgot what I was going to say.
That's part of the decision making, though, when we look at a venue,
Yeah.
is what is the layout of this? What would it look like to have another group in house? And that's one of our values when we're looking at ballrooms is, do we have the entire ballroom? Is there going to be would there be another group? And sometimes that's the deal breaker. Is if it's a ballroom that's too large for us to fill and we can't make use of all the other rooms to justify holding them, then maybe that's not the best fit for us.
So that's all in the pre-planning.
Yeah.
You try to avoid
Hopefully
that.
you just avoid that ahead of time, right? And that's what you learn, I think, in the years of doing this. You learn what works for your program. You learn what doesn't work. And so, yeah, those are the things you can address ahead of time.
How often are you trying to minimize the number of room flipping? So let's explain flipping of rooms a little bit, where it would be in a convention space where you have a meeting with round table, say people are eating a breakfast buffet while like the morning session is happening, but then you want the next session to be like a theater style or something like that. Are you thinking about those room flips, or are you trying to just minimize those in general?
We are trying to minimize those. I think it saves us stress on the hotel side, and it saves stress on our team side that they have to recheck it. And so where we can avoid a room flip, we will. But we are also not afraid to ask for a room flip if we really need to. And again, those are things that would be discussed with the hotel ahead of time. So I'm not just going to drop in one day and be like, all right, I need this room flipped in the next 5 minutes. It's not that quick of a turnaround at hotels,
it's
right?
so
They have
stressful.
they have to get their teams together. And I have to be mindful of that as well. You know, that they have things that they have to work through on their end before they can make that happen. And so, we do try to minimize the room flips. We try to use existing setups for things like if a meeting, maybe that's not the ideal setup, but that's the setup we already have in the room. I might try to minimize that and convince the person that's leading that meeting, like, hey, this setup would still work really well for your meeting. This is why. And then when it comes to AV things as well, right? If they have a mic and things that AV team has to set up, I'm going to try to minimize the amount of times that they have to set that up too.
Right. What's the craziest? Can you think of a crazy room flip that you had to do and it was just complete chaos?
So we were in Chicago last summer and they didn't have a lot of different spaces for us to work in. And so there was one room that we used for multiple things, multiple times a day. And so I want to say that leading up to that week, there was something that we found. We're like, oh, we don't have a space for this. What are we going to do? It has to be in this room. And so we did have to ask them to flip it. But again, we knew enough ahead of time. I don't think actually I did. Just kidding. Another one came to mind. But we were in Amelia Island and the weather in Florida is pretty unpredictable. Like they call it the Sunshine State.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's like a tongue-in-cheek thing because there's no way. It rains every day.
Yeah.
And so we had this board meeting set for outside and it was raining. So we had to bring it in. the only room that we could really use for it that would fit this size was a room that was already set up, had already been decorated. And so we did have to make that call to use that room for this dinner. So that was a little bit crazy. It was stressful on all ends. Like, it was stressful on the hotel side. It was stressful on our staff that was planning this board dinner. It was stressful on the side of the people who had already decorated this room and had that room ready to go. I mean, it was just chaotic. So we did try to avoid it as much as possible. And especially in Florida, always have a backup. Like, we always have a backup space for those lawns. So
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You're bringing me back. I mean, these weather calls, I mean,
they're hard.
it keeps getting pushed and pushed later and later in the day because you want to make sure you're delivering to the customer what they envisioned. And when you can't predict the weather, but at the same time, you have to do the setup of something, you know, at the same time, for us, we have audio, video, lighting equipment. You can't just have that stuff sitting in the rain, but we're also at the mercy of, like, usually it's like, oh, we're going to make the rain call, the weather call at noon. Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Plenty of time till the evening. It keeps getting pushed 1, 2, 3, 4 o'clock. And you're like, I don't have enough, you know, so you have to, like, start, you know, eating from your P&L in a sense, where you're just like, I got to book extra technicians here just in case this is a last minute rain call, because I need all hands on deck to just make it happen as fast as we can. And those are always tough. We've had situations where the backup was the general session room because that's the only space available.
Yeah.
But it's like, you already had the general session space set up. Now, like, banquets has to strike everything, you know, like, and you turn it into an evening party. Wow. I have so much respect for people in the event space. I was in it for 10 years. I miss the people. I can't say I miss that stress level. Have you managed, how's your stress level management from when you started to now? Would you say, like, what would you say the growth is there?
I think it's a different stress. When I started in my company 9 years ago, I started out as a registration and rooming coordinator. And so my stress was about the details, right? The making sure every room was right, every registration was correct, every meal was accounted for. That was my stress. It was in the spreadsheets and in the details. I think since then, I've had a couple different roles within my team, and I now serve as the conference director. And so my stress is different. My stress now is bigger decisions that impact the overall feel of our conference. It's a lot of leading. And so my stress comes more with leading a team, leading the different personalities, helping them problem solve, that kind of thing. And so I think it's a different stress. I don't know that I could say that it's more or less. I think it's just different.
Yeah. Those large, the big pictures can be very daunting at times too. Yeah.
Right. And you're right. The problems I'm solving are no longer that this person have a room at the hotel, and now I have to deal with this guest who doesn't have a room at the hotel, but they were on my list, right? Which is very stressful. Yeah. Now I'm dealing more with, can our trucks even fit in this into this hotel to get our equipment into the room that we need to get into? Or sometimes interpersonal issues that come up that I have to help our team solve and walk with them through that. And so it's different, but I think I really enjoyed this season, and I'm really enjoying the season now. And I feel like I'm really operating in what I love to do.
Yeah. Has event planning given you some tools when it comes to raising Mila?
Yes, I think event planning has made me flexible.
Okay.
Which sounds counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But one of the first things I learned in planning events is that I need to write my plans in pencil. There are degrees of plan writing. Right?
That's so good.
Yeah. And so I think, the first draft is in pencil. Like, anything goes, I can make changes. Nobody's going to know the difference. It's fine. I can pivot, right?
Yeah.
Then there's another iteration of my plans that's written in like erasable pen. It's a little more permanent. If I make any if I erase something or make a change in the plan, it's going to be a little more noticeable. People are going to see that more.
Yeah.
And so for sure, that speaks into how we've raised Mila. I think it's made me more adaptable for sure. It's made me understand not everything's going to go as planned, and we're still going to have a great time. And so let's keep it moving. And for sure, I've learned that from event management. It's how to be flexible.
That's an amazing. Did you think of that yourself?
Yeah, I think. Maybe.
Oh my gosh, we're putting that on the we're putting that on billboards. I love that. Like, what was it? Like, plans are made in pencil.
Make your plans in pencil. Write your plans in pencil.
Pencil. To me, that says a lot about growth as a human. The older we get, the less kind of, well, hopefully, the goal is to not be as like just hard set on something and realize that plans do change and things are not going to be what we expect it to be at all times. And to have that posture of, I'm still going to make the plans. You're not going to like avoid plans. You're still going to make them, but it's subject to change at any time. And you're listening to that at all times as well. You're listening to your gut. And when you start using that erasable pen where it's a little bit more permanent, is that a gut-based decision for you? Is that like you know it in yourself that like, yeah, this is the right way to do it?
Yeah, I think it's a gut thing. I think I'm very collaborative. So I want input from my team. And so I might write my plan in pencil. And then once I talk about it with my team and they've had a chance to speak into it, then I'll write it in pen as we're getting closer to the conference too, right? Because the closer you get to the conference, the less of a chance there is for you to be able to erase things and it not have impact, right? So, yeah, I think for sure you have to understand where you are in your planning stage and understand what is flexible and what isn't.
Okay.
What's already set in stone. Yeah.
Right. And has event planning given you tools to raise your daughter, like vice versa?
Being flexible with her was key because we would figure out, her schedule, let's say when she was a baby. And as soon as we figured it out, her routine would change. Inevitably, it was like she knew the timing of when we were like, all right, we got this routine figured out. We know the timing of her naps. We know how many meals she's going to have a day, and then she would change. And so I think it helped me to be adaptable in that sense, to not get so focused in on this is the routine, this is how it's going to go, it's written in pen. It was really more of like, all right, let's see what today holds, and understanding that she doesn't come with a schedule. She doesn't have a plan written in pencil or pen, and so like, how do we manage that and still have a good time? Because I don't want to be so structured that we aren't able to relax and have a good time and take that time to wander around and discover new things and see things through her eyes. And so I think it has given me that skill set with her. I think another thing that has really helped me is when I'm in my event planning mode in my world, I've been told that I'm not very easily frazzled, right? So I don't know if you've ever heard the analogy of the duck. Like, people tell me this all the time, and I've come across a number of people who've never heard this, but I've had people say that I'm like a duck, right? So a duck is like, as they're swimming on the water, they look very calm, very serene on the surface. But under the water, if you were to look at their feet, they're like going, right? And so they've used that with me a number of times at work. People who have worked with me are like, you just look like so even keel, like nothing really rattles you. You just kind of take it all in stride. And I've learned to carry that over into my life with Mila sometimes, because yeah, there are definitely times where she has more of an attitude, or like, again, things are not going as planned. And I've learned to kind of filter and take the time to say like, all right, let me think through this before reacting. And that's really what being calm really means for me. Is it's not so much that I am calm. That is stressful. Whatever your change you're bringing to me last minute is stressful, but I'm going to take the time to think about it before I react. And so that has helped me with Mila as well.
I love that. They go hand in hand with event and raising a kid. Something that I heard you say was, with Mila, allowing her to play because you want it to be fun, you know, not like just completely rigid all the time. And I have to think that even in events, that's kind of the feeling that you want your guests to walk into, is a sense of wonder and excitement when they walk into the ballroom. It's a playful energy. Oh, I wonder what we're going to be talking about today. It opens up this like atmosphere of curiosity and wanting to learn or wanting to experience. And it's funny because you're working in a very structured place, but trying to create experience that's not structured. It's a very energetic type of like spirit and like everything all like awe in some sense. You know what I mean? It's funny how those two kind of like are hand in hand with each other and working together.
A big part of events is the relational aspect.
Yeah.
And so you do want to make sure that you're not so structured that you're leaving out that room for conversation, that room for those relaxed interactions between your guests. And so how do you give them something that's semi-structured, right? Like, you know, the time, you know that you're going to be providing a meal, you know that you might have a program this amount of time, but then also making sure that you're building in that time where it's more relaxed and they can just connect with the other guests and talk about what they're experiencing at the event, right? If their mind was blown by one of the speakers, that they're able to process that with another guest who's experiencing the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a balance there to be struck of like, this is what we need to structure because this is what we need to plan with the hotel. And this is what we're going to hold pretty loosely to allow that space for conversation.
You build that in, and rather than going, okay, 1:00 we're doing this, and then 1:30 we're doing this, 1:31, you know. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, one more question for you, and we'll wrap it up. Is there anything in your current process that you're still trying to crack the code on? Like, is there something that you're hoping that, like, in the next year or two, I want to get that a little bit better in my workflow?
I think one of the things that I would like to work on is thinking through our program, like our on-stage program and what's happening there. We do the same conference essentially twice a year. It's different speakers every time, but overall the same flow. And so how do we keep that fresh? Because we have about 60% of our attendees are repeat guests and 40% are new.
Okay.
And so how do we keep it fresh for that 60% that's coming that encourages them to continue to come, right? And so that comes down to like the speaker selection, the flow of the program, that kind of thing. And so for a long time, for the last couple of years, we didn't even get into the pandemic and how it affected my job. But one of the big things was we didn't get to book venues out for a while. And there were times where we were booking a venue 6 months out. And so my goal for the last couple of years has been to catch us up. I like being out like 2 years and having a contracted venue. That's my goal.
Yeah.
Now that that's done, now I'm moving on to hopefully fine-tuning that program process where we can start booking speakers more ahead of time, start working on what does that look like from a speaker engagement standpoint. How do we interact with them? How do we help them to craft their time on our stage to accomplish the goals of the conference? And so I think that's something that our team is working on now. And I'm looking forward to how to make it fresh for everyone. Yeah,
and having all of that kind of planned out and more solidified, it makes it so much more, it makes the whole experience probably way more pleasant when you're not under the clock. Like, oh, we got to figure this out in a month, you know, like it's, it makes it more fun to actually experience where, you know, a lot of events sometimes can just be like pulling your hair out. This is a nightmare. So you're trying to make the experience overall for everybody a much more pleasant one.
Right. Yeah. And now having the time, you know, that space to think through it more versus having to make decisions because we're in a time crunch and we have to make that call.
Yeah.
I think there's a big difference there. Creatively, even, you know, your ideas come out way more, I think, when you have the space to think through them, space to kind of mull them over and all of that versus having to make a call because you have to.
Yeah. Wow. Vita, this flew by. I can't say it enough. There's just so much respect for you and the people in the event space. It's just such a thankless job. And, you know, the connections that I've made over the years in people in this industry, it's a different breed. The event people, they will make it happen for you, and they will do it with such care. And it's really cool to kind of hear a little bit about your mindset in that. I knew when I scheduled this with you, I knew you were going to be humble about it and going, I don't even know what we want to talk about, or something. I don't know how you said it, but in my head, I was just like, all right, Vita, we're going to talk about this.
It's great. Yeah, it's been fun. I think event planners, sorry, my eyes are tearing because Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think event planners have to be like a little bit crazy and like a little bit of the chaos to go into this industry for sure. But it's so much fun. And I would say like there is like an instant gratification aspect of it where you get to see the event come together, you know, and you're kind of pregnant with all these details, and then this is your baby once it actually happens. But yeah, it's been fun to talk about it a little more with you. I think we've gotten a chance in the past, just based on your experience, to commiserate a little bit more. But yeah. Well,
we'll definitely do this again. Like, there's just so many outside of event planning. There's just so many things that I love hearing you talk about when it comes to managing people. I would love to hear at some point in the future how your leadership has changed, you know? Your leadership style has changed. And yeah, it's funny because it always goes beyond the actual thing that you're doing. There's just so many different like aspects of creativity that like almost like the Excel sheets of like, or the calendars is like it's just that surface, that's like the duck.
Yeah.
Everything underneath is like leadership and empathy. All that stuff is really what drives that thing.
Yeah. I would love to talk about that more with you. I feel like I've learned so much, and it's something it's an aspect of my role I've really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And so, I'd love to do that.
All right, Vita, I'm going to do a quick outro. So just hang on.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to another episode of Craft Talk. Say bye, Vita.
Bye.
Nice. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was fun.